Hello and welcome to this episode of the Let's Talk About podcast. And today you've just got me. There are no guests, so I'm afraid it's just me talking, but I won't keep you for too long. Thank you for tuning in. And as you know, that we look at those very difficult and challenging conversations and how to have them and what they mean for different people, how to start them, how to open them up, how to share stories with other people. I had the privilege of being a hostage and crisis negotiator for over a decade. I've had the privilege of volunteering on some crisis lines and speaking to hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have been in crisis. And three very important lessons I learnt from my time as a negotiator were these. Number one is, very sadly, we will all have a crisis in our life at some stage. And most crises revolve around loss and how we manage and deal with the impact of the loss. And that can be the loss of a loved one, of course, but it can also be the loss of something that might be perceived by somebody else as not being so great. Maybe the loss of an animal. I'm a big animal fan and I've lost quite a few pets in my life, and I definitely grieve over them. It might be the loss of face in front of other people. It might be the loss of your keys, but we'll all have some sort of crisis in our lives. The second one is that loneliness is one of the biggest killers in the UK, if not the world. You don't have to be living on your own to feel lonely. You can definitely be dealing with challenges, perhaps both in your personal life and your work life. That often makes it harder to manage those challenges. And when we have those internal dialogue challenges and we don't talk and we don't share it with other people, it can feel like a very lonely place. Leadership, I always say, is one of the loneliest jobs in the world, because often I think as a leader, you take on that responsibility. You don't feel that you can burden other people, or that it might make you look like a weak leader if you do share how you're genuinely feeling. And then, of course, we have everyone has a story, and we all have our own stories. And I'm so grateful that I can include other people's stories on this podcast, but also that I've had the opportunity to listen to many other people's stories and learnt so many lessons in each one of those. And that's, for me, probably one of the most important reasons of creating this podcast, is that I've had some amazing guests on and we talk about their stories and their ideas and what it's like to be human and to have that human connection. And today we're going to touch on grief. So last week I sent out an email and a newsletter, and it touched upon grief, and I had lots of messages back. And so I thought that this week would be a good idea to just talk a little bit more about grief, which is all very personal to each one of us. And I am not an expert in grief management. There are many great counsellors and coaches out there that are, but I just thought I'd share some of my experiences around grief and also some of the stories that people shared with me, both as a negotiator, but also just as a human being. So a couple of my own personal stories around grief, and I'm going to talk specifically about the loss of loved ones. For me, I really feel that I was exposed to grief in my 30s when I lost a very good friend of mine called Jane, and she died from cancer. It was one of those experiences I'll never forget in my life. It will always stay with me. I often think about her now, especially as I age, and I know that she really wanted to live a full life, a full life. And I feel saddened that she never got the opportunity to be able to do that. And that grief came in a variety of different ways for me. I didn't really know how to express it. I didn't really understand grief. I'd lost my grandparents before that, both my grandma and my granddad, and I lost my nan a little bit later. But with Jane, it was that shock of a young person being taken from the world, a young person who I loved and cared about very deeply. And I remember feeling overwhelmed with the feelings, not really sure what to expect, not really sure how to manage it. And I think in life you get experiences which equips you. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just explaining my own feelings. But I think in life you get experiences and you experience loss and you find a way to manage it. And certainly at that stage, I hadn't felt and I hadn't found a way to manage it at all. And it was a very challenging and hard time. Now, there's a great podcast in the Communication Coach series from a lady called Claire who talks about the loss of her 7-year-old daughter, Annalise, through sepsis and shares her story. It's one of the conversations in the coffee shop. And I remember listening to that and being very touched by Claire's story and the resilience and compassion and understanding that she had, and how she has been able to grow and write her own book now that shares her story in the hope that it will help other people. I think my question for you today is, how are you managing your own grief? I know probably lots of you out there right here, right now, at this moment, are experiencing loss of some sort. You might be experiencing a big change if it's not the loss of a loved one. And we are such emotional human beings. I mean, we're all different. We all deal with things in different ways. You know, some of us talk and some of us don't talk. We know certainly with men, they don't talk as openly as women. And some of the Let's Talk About series, we've already talked about that and we'll continue to talk about that. But what do you do? How do you manage your own grief? I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think that we all have our own ways of dealing with it. The second time I've experienced grief, which left a massive hole in my heart, was I feel myself getting a bit emotional there, but it's the loss of my dad. So we lost my dad in 2022 in November, and we had the funeral a few weeks, I think it was actually the week before Christmas. And so everything was on hold, as you can imagine, for 2022. My dad was 83 when he passed. And as you can see, that still has a profound effect on me, even when I talk about it. And what I found with my dad was that one of the things I really experienced, and I don't know if other people experience this too, this is just my personal experience, but I remember trying to find him, trying to not find him because I didn't know he was dead, because of course I did, but trying to find him, I want to say essence, trying to find the essence of him. I couldn't find it in my house, and I thought when I went to my family home that I'd be able to find it there. And I remember walking through the door and being so disappointed that I couldn't find it there. It wasn't there. And I remember walking around the streets where my family home is, where my mum and dad and my mum still lives, and walking around those streets and trying to find him and just feeling this immense heaviness and loss that I'd lost something and I couldn't find it. I'm hoping this might make sense to some of you. This was just my personal experience. And my sister and my mum have their own personal experiences. But I just couldn't find him. And I remember walking back, there was this park we used to go to. And I remember walking back from the park and I felt him. I felt his essence. I felt there was something in the air. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it, but I felt him. And immediately that I got that feeling, I settled down. I could physically and emotionally feel myself settling down. But it was that literally searching for him, trying to find the place where I would feel him most, trying to find where he was, and that loss that you experience through that. Some of you may be listening to this and thinking, what on earth are you talking about, Nick? I've never had that experience, and that's fine. And some of you may well be listening to this and thinking, yeah, I can really relate to that. I can really relate to that. Now, my dad died at 83, and he'd been an unwell man for some time. And so he had a very weak heart, and that's what killed him in the end. And although it was expected, it was unexpected. It happened on a day which I wasn't expecting it to happen. I think A lot of the time, loss occurs like that, death occurs like that. You'll all have your own experiences. And I remember walking in, so I used to own a coffee shop. I remember walking into the coffee shop and people not knowing what to say to me, not through any reason other than I think people sometimes are scared of what to say. They don't want to upset the other person. They don't really know what to say. They're not sure if it's the right thing to talk about it. And for me, I really wanted to talk about it. I really wanted to talk about my dad. I wanted his name mentioned. I wanted to be able to say the word dad. I wanted people to experience what it had been like losing your dad. And some of my friends have said to me, you know, when you lose a parent, it's very different. I I can relate to that. I don't necessarily think that's true for everybody, depending on the relationship that you have with your parents, but definitely I can relate to that. A sense of identity leaving, watching my mum deal with the grief and managing emotions towards that as well. You know, she'd been with my dad since she was 22. So they spent their whole adult life together, and her managing her own grief and me not understanding what that management of her grief was, and wondering where my mum had gone for a period of time. You know, all those different feelings and thoughts that we had. And I'm sure my sister would have a completely different, maybe similar, same, I don't know, experience of how she was managing her grief. I do remember I really wanted to talk to him about him. And I do remember when people kind of didn't really know what to say. And so I would find a way to drop his name into the conversation and say things like, oh, my dad would have really appreciated that. Or my dad loved the hot chocolate here, because he did. He was a massive hot chocolate fiend, especially with cream and marshmallows. A very sweet tooth for my dad. And I remember just wanting to share stories about him, especially shortly after he had died. Now, some people will feel the same and some won't. Again, as I say, it's all individual. I'm just sharing my stories because sometimes I think when you share your story, it helps other people to manage their own grief, to deal with what they're going through, to deal with the loss. And so that's my story about my dad. And over time, I journaled. That was the other thing I did. I journaled every day. I journaled every day for about 3 or 4 months because I wanted to know, I wanted to remember how it felt. I've only looked at that journal once because I feel strong enough now that I don't need to look at that. Maybe that makes sense to some of you, but I found it a real way of release. And I remember my other half, Jules, saying to me at the Christmas, she said, "What do you want for Christmas?" I said, "I don't want anything. All I want is my dad back," because that's all I wanted at the time. Just to have that one more conversation with him. And I did a presentation shortly after he had passed. And I remember I always tell my dad's favorite joke whenever I do a training session or whenever I present, which is like that my surname really is perfect and my dad was born perfect. My dad used to tell my mum that he was born perfect and she only became it when she met and married him. And that was his favorite joke of all time. And I remember saying that. And then I remember saying, and we lost my dad last week. And this gentleman came up to me at the end of it and he said, "I've just recently lost my dad as well." And he said, "I reckon your dad would be really proud of you to have seen you get to this stage in your life and to be doing so well." And that really helped. I don't know why, and I'm not saying it would help other people, but that really helped. Just that human connection, that human contact of a complete stranger. I'd never met him before, but of him coming and sharing a bit of his story, not saying, "Oh, I understand completely how you feel," because we know those words don't work. Not taking over the conversation and making it about him, but just in a very gentle and kind way, I felt, acknowledging my pain and recognizing the relationship that I had with my dad. Now, I had no idea how this podcast was going to go today. I haven't scripted it. I've got 3 things I'd like to talk about. So it's interesting when I talk about dad in this raw and open and honest way, that those emotions are still there and they'll still come back. And that's the thing with grief, I think, is that sometimes you have no idea how it's going to present, when it's going to present, how it's going to show up. And it's about having strategies in place to be able to manage that, especially in those very raw times. those times when it's all consuming, it's all you can focus on, it's all you can deal with, dealing with the funeral and then probate, and helping my mum deal with the complexities of online digital worlds. Some of you will be able to recognize this because the only thing she can do is order Tesco's online on her phone, which I think is incredible anyway, because it's probably one of the hardest things to do is to do your food order, and she's learnt that since my dad died. This is not on email. She doesn't really understand mobile phones. So having to deal with stocks and shares, having to deal with probate, everything's online. And it makes it so complex when you're already in a state of shock and a state of grieving and not really understanding. So having to navigate that is incredibly hard as well. And as time moves forward, for me, it became a little bit easier. It has become a bit easier. I remember my dad with great fondness. Where I'm sitting now, I can see the rose bush that we planted for him. And I always remember my dad with great fondness. But I had a good relationship with my dad, and I know that that's not the same for other people. So everybody's grief will be very different. And I think that's one of the points I'd really like to make, is it's okay to be different. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I never felt that, I never had that, I didn't even think about my dad that way, or I didn't think about the loss of my friend that way, then that's okay as well. I think sometimes we try and box things because it makes us feel comfortable, and I don't think you can box how you deal with grief. The second thing I'd like to share with you is something called Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And the reason I'm going to share this with you is because I didn't know about it for many years. And then when I discovered it, I realized that actually it helped me personally. Again, it's all about me, and it might not be for you, but it helped me to recognize that when I was experiencing loss of some sort, or grief, or a massive change in my life, or even disappointment, that I was likely to go through these emotions. And knowing that I'm likely to go through those emotions somehow helps me to feel a little bit more in control. And when we feel in control, we come at life more from the logical side than the emotional side. So I'm just going to read the 5 stages of grief from Kubler-Ross. Now, of course, as human beings, we don't necessarily follow a cycle in a particular way. We might go through one emotion, come back to it. We might jump an emotion, might jump 3 emotions and then come back to it. But these are the 5 stages of grief, or when you're dealing with a big change. The first one is denial. And I'm just going to use my dad as an example because I can remember this very much so. So he got rushed into hospital whilst he was staying with us at my family home. He rushed into hospital, and he was in hospital for 2 nights. And the second morning, he passed around about 9 a.m. and I didn't get that. And some of you will be able to relate to this. I didn't get there in time. I got the call from the hospital. I dropped everything. I remember because I was supposed to be running a gym class. I just got down to the gym when I got the call, and I dropped everything. My mum was here. I bundled her into the car, and we drove as fast as we could to the hospital, but unfortunately we didn't make it in time to be with him as he passed. And sometimes I wonder if that was deliberate on his part, that he didn't want us to be there. I'm not saying that's true. Maybe it's something that I use to reconcile myself. But I feel and believe that my dad was okay. I know he was with a nurse. The nurse sat with him. The nurse that rang me sat with him the whole time. So I know he wasn't alone. I also have a feeling my cheeky dad may have wanted to control that situation and not want us to be there in the kindest way possible. And it was a shock. And I couldn't quite believe it. I couldn't quite believe that my dad'd gone. For some period of time, I was like, that's supposed to be it. No, it's not here. And I think sometimes talking to other people who have experienced grief, and when it's really unexpected, it's that shock, and we go into denial. And then the second one is anger. And I remember being really angry. I remember being really angry at the world that everybody was still celebrating Christmas and I didn't want to celebrate Christmas. I remember being really angry that people were avoiding the subject and I wanted to talk about the subject. I remember that. And I had periods of both those things, shock and anger, especially at the beginning. of that grieving process. I always feel that these conversations are just conversations over a coffee or a cup of tea. Then the third one is bargaining, where you bargain, with yourself, where you bargain with life, where if you believe in the universe, God, the divine, whatever it might be, you might bargain with them and say, just let them live, let it be okay. If it's okay, then, I'll do this, I'll do that. And that whole bargaining, you might bargain with yourself that, okay, tomorrow I'm going to get out of bed. Or tomorrow I'm going to stop drinking wine. Tomorrow I'll go and visit him. Tomorrow I'll go to the funeral directors, whatever it might be. Then we have depression. And this is where we get that period of flatness and feeling very low. Now, depression and feeling very low, of course, are very different. It's that sadness, that heaviness. I've never had extreme depression myself. I've felt low on many an occasion in life. I've never experienced depression to the point where I felt I needed to go to the doctor and get some tablets, and I know the two are very different. So that's the fourth one. But a lot of people who experience loss do get depression, do get that isolation, do get that loneliness, do get that, how on earth am I going to get up in the morning? How on earth am I going to carry on with my life? Especially again, if it's that sudden shock. And 1 minute everything's okay, and then the next minute everything is not okay. And life changes literally in a heartbeat. And then we get to acceptance. And what I have learned in life, I'm 57 now, and what I have learnt in life is that acceptance is key for you to be able to move forward, for me to be able to move forward. And it doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't mean we stop caring or we stop loving or we stop feeling pain. It just means that slowly but surely, one very small step at a time, we can start to move forward again. And I think for me personally, that's the key around acceptance, is that you can start to move forward slowly again. And again, that is absolutely individual, and it takes different people, different times to be able to do that. And the third point I'd like to cover today is about opening up the conversation. Because sometimes, as the person who is grieving, you want someone else to open up the conversation. Sometimes you're not sure, as the person who is grieving, whether you should open up the conversation, especially if it's with a group of people that you don't really know and you don't trust. I mean, trust is key on how much we share with other people. Anyway, and it might also be, how are you managing your own grief and how are you dealing with it? Eventually, I was going to say life has to return to normal, and I don't mean it in a flippant, whatever normal is, but eventually we go back to the things that we were doing. We go back to work. We go back to trying to move forward. We go back to laughing. We go back to smiling. We go back to seeing our friends, all in time, all when we're ready. And some of us may never be ready to remove that pain. Eventually we do. And then it's, how do you navigate and manage that? Now, I don't have the answers to this around how you navigate and manage going back to that, whatever is normal in your life, those day-to-day routines, because there's still bills to pay. Life goes on. I remember that with Jane. Gosh, that poem, Stop the Clocks, from Four Weddings and a Funeral. I really felt that with Jane's death. I just couldn't believe, honestly, I couldn't believe that the world was still turning. I just wanted to shout at the world, will you just stop? Will you please just stop? And of course that doesn't happen, and everybody else is living their own life, and they carry on not even acknowledging or knowing about your pain, not because they don't care, but because they don't know. And if they do know, it might be that they don't know how to deal with that. So here's a couple of ways for you, if you are a person who has a friend or a family member or a colleague who has lost somebody and you know of that loss, is just some tips for you. Again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but these are just some of the things that I found worked in my life. And they're definitely some of the things I've found that have worked with other people when I've spoken to them about their own grief. So the first one is talk about them. Talk about that person. If it's comfortable for the other person to talk about, of course. So we can always check in and we can always say something along the lines of, oh, tell me a little bit more about them. And they might not want to. It might be too emotional. It might be too painful. They'll say, I can't. It's too painful at the moment. I've had that before. I can't talk about it at the moment. It's too painful. But that's okay, because what we do by saying that is we allow that space of safety for it to be okay to talk about them. If you can, use that person's name. Use the name of the person that has passed. Keep their memory alive with the other person. Talk about them, share stories, listen to them. That's the biggie. Listen to them. Listen to them, find out where they are, what they need, what they want from you. Even complete strangers will open up to you if you just listen to them. Not giving them a solution or problem solving or telling them it'll be okay or that time's a great healer or, well, 83 is a good old age. When you're grieving, you don't really want to hear those hear those things. They might be logical. And when you're emotional, honestly, we don't really want to hear them. It's like when you have a relationship and the other party ends it and you are hurting like mad and your heart is breaking and somebody says there's plenty more fish in the sea. Actually, I don't want that plenty more fish in the sea. I want that fish. There's different ways of having conversations with people. Just listen to them, reflect back what you're hearing and what you're seeing. Use words that they're using, especially to describe the loved one that they've lost, if it's a loved one that they've lost. Talk about it. Let them have that space that's safe to talk about them. And I'm going to kind of finish there. I mean, we could talk about this. I could talk about this all afternoon. You'll all have your own individual stories, none of them right, none of them wrong. You'll all be going through your own challenges in life, whether that involves a loss of a loved one or big changes that are happening or relationship breakups, whatever they might be. We're all dealing with our own challenges, and it's how we communicate and behave that's different when we're in a hard part of our story and a hard part of our journey. And for me, it's about that human connection. It's about having difficult conversations, even when we feel uncomfortable, because it's not about you, it's about the other person. And it feels like it's about us because it's like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset anybody. But it's not about you. It's about what the other person needs and wants from you right here, right now, especially when they're grieving or they're in crisis mode. We will be talking more about grief in different ways. We'll be sharing other people's stories. Thank you for being part of my story. Thank you for listening. Please like and share and subscribe to this podcast, especially if you think it would help somebody else. Please share it with somebody else. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for listening. If you have in any way been affected by today's podcast episode, there are numbers at the end of the transcript which you can contact. We'd like to thank you all for listening. And if you'd like to join our Facebook group, there is also a link to that in the notes that go with this podcast. Have a great day.